Welcome to Music from Home, a series of videos by Yakima Symphony Orchestra musicians. My name is David McLemore. I'm the principal tubist of the Yakima Symphony, as well as the professor of tuba and euphonium at Central Washington University. In this video, I'm going to discuss the underlying physics involved with playing a brass instrument. Now don't worry, this isn't a CWU music course, and our dive into physics is going to be fairly shallow. My goal here is to just answer some of the hows and whys that may come up when you listen to the various brass instruments during a YSO concert. Now, to start off, the most commonly asked question I certainly get as a tuba player and a brass player is, how do you make that sound come out of that bell? When I'm playing outreach concerts with the Yakima Symphony Orchestra Brass Quintet, it's often very entertaining to turn this question around and ask the students in the audience how they think sound is made on a brass instrument. Some of them suggest that we sing through the instrument. Others will tell us that it's pushing down the valves. And others still will suggest that simply blowing air into the instrument is sufficient for the sound to be made. So here's a little bit of physics. With any physical vibration or motion that produces a sound, there are two parts, there are two components. There's the object, which is moving, and then there is a force that is applied to that object, which breaks the inertia, that transfers energy, and causes the sound. It turns out that on outreach concerts, when the elementary students talk about blowing through brass instrument as being how the sound is made, they're partly correct, because it turns out airflow is the medium through which energy is transferred and vibration is created. Hence, we have the brass wind family and the woodwind family. In both cases, both families of instruments are driven by wind. That is the force which gives rise to the sound. With brass instruments, the object that's vibrating, that the air is driving to vibrate, is our lips, formed in what we call an embouchure. So essentially, air moves across the embouchure and causes the lips to vibrate. All of the air within the instrument, from the mouthpiece through to the bell, we can think of that as a column of air. And as it turns out, when the lips vibrate, so does that air column within the instrument. So not only are the lips vibrating, but they are causing the air itself within the instrument is vibrating as well. The relationship between the embouchure and the airstream has presented something of a chicken and egg situation in brass pedagogy. Some teaching approaches emphasize the role of the wind and airflow. Other teaching approaches place more emphasis on the musculature, on the embouchure itself. Now, the truth is, you need both. I can form the world's best embouchure, and if I don't move air across it, nothing's going to happen. Now, on the other hand, if I move the best, most robust airflow into the instrument, or across the lips even without an instrument in front of me, but if I don't form an embouchure, they can't vibrate. You need to have both the formation of the embouchure and wind to create the sound. Another question that we tuba players in particular receive quite a lot is, how do you fill that big instrument with air? Well, as it turns out, I'm not. At least not as much wind as you think I am. The air that I'm using serves to make the embouchure vibrate. And that's basically it. The important thing to know, it's not that we're filling the instrument with air. What we're really filling the instrument with is vibration. So a little bit more physics for you. Brass instruments are made of a metal, brass, which is itself an alloy made of copper and zinc. Metal alloys, like brass, are what we call acoustically reflexive, which is just a fancy way of saying they're amplifier. So every brass instrument is essentially an acoustic, non-electric amplifier. It takes the input channeled through a mouthpiece into the instrument, and it converts it into the sound of that instrument. The instrument gives that vibratory pattern, that buzz, the characteristic timbre and quality of that instrument. When you're listening to a YSO concert, some of you may have wondered how brass instruments can play so many notes when, relative to other instruments in the orchestra, we have so very few keys or valves, or in the case of the trombone, a single slide. Well, there are two answers to this question. And the first is this: playing brass instruments is a lot like operating an elevator. All pitched musical instruments are governed by what's called the harmonic series. This is a series of notes that is based on a single fundamental frequency from which all the other notes are derived. The fundamental note will vary from instrument to instrument. In the brass family, the different brass instruments have different fundamental frequencies. When you hear me play a note on tuba, say low C, below the bass clef staff, you aren't just hearing that low C. You're hearing many, many harmonics that are contained within that note, frequencies that are higher than that C. You're hearing a whole harmonic series. Here's a depiction of the harmonic series for a contrabass tuba in C. That each harmonic is numbered starting with that fundamental frequency, which is the first harmonic, and you'll see that each harmonic on the harmonic series corresponds to a very particular specific note. All of these notes can be played open on the instrument. No valves required. So here I will play partials 1 through 16 for you. So hopefully you can now see how playing a brass instrument is a bit like operating an elevator, a very peculiar elevator where the lower floors are very far apart and the upper floors are very increasingly close together. In other words, the lower partials are very easy to differentiate one from the other. If you're trying to get to the third floor, you're not likely to find yourself on 2 or 4. You're probably going to be able to get to the third floor fairly consistently. In the upper harmonics, however, the upper floors, things get dicey. If you're trying to go to the 12th floor, it's entirely feasible that you might accidentally end up somewhere between 10 and 14. For this reason, one of the most important fundamentals exercises we brass players work on is lip flexibility, specifically exercises like lip slurs. Imagine traveling repeatedly on this musical elevator and practicing getting between 2 or more floors as efficiently and quickly as possible. That's essentially what lip slur exercises are. We're refining our ability to quickly and efficiently move up and down the elevator. Now, looking back at the harmonic series, you may have noticed, hey, there's still a lot of notes you're missing there. And you'd be correct. With only the notes of the harmonic series, we're quite limited, especially in the low register, to tunes like Reveille. This is where the second part of the answer comes in, and it deals with the horizontal dimension of brass playing. We use systems of valves, or in the case of the trombone, a slide, to lengthen or shorten the instrument. And in doing so, we change the fundamental frequency of the instrument. And not only that, when we change the fundamental frequency of the instrument, we change the notes of the harmonic series. You change the bottom note, you change every note above it as well. In order to access all the notes that we're missing between these partials, we can either lengthen the instrument, which is going to lower the pitch, or we can make the instrument shorter, which is going to raise the pitch. And the reason for this is because the tube is where that standing wave, where that vibratory pattern is established. So you can think of valve sets on brass instruments a lot like plumbing. They redirect airflow, but really what they're redirecting is vibration. We're adding, or in some cases subtracting, but usually we're adding length to the tube. As a general rule, when we press down our first valves, the fundamental frequency is lowered by a whole step or 2 half steps. When we use our second valves, that lowers the pitch by a half step. When we use our third valve, that lowers the pitch by a minor third or 3 half steps. And then when we use our fourth valve, because some brass instruments have fourth valves, that lowers the pitch by a perfect fourth, which is 5 half steps. By using these valves in conjunction with one another, we can cross the gaps in the harmonic series and we can become a fully chromatic instrument. All those notes I just played, except the last one, were on the third harmonic. I simply slid down the third harmonic by depressing different combinations of valves. To think of this another way, we're taking this elevator, this vertical component of brass playing, and we are sliding the elevator down. As we change the length of the tube, we establish a new fundamental frequency and the elevator shifts, and we are able to access floors we were not able to previously. Now, the trombone is a distinct outlier in terms of the brass family. It's the only brass instrument that relies on a slide instead of a system of valves. Now, this comes with advantages and disadvantages. In terms of advantages, the trombonist can more precisely manipulate the length of the tube and achieve a much more perfect degree of intonation. Now, on the downside, since the trombonist has complete control over the intonation, they kind of don't have an excuse to play out of tune. Now, each family of instruments has some particular abilities that are unique to it, and the brass family is no different. One special effect that I'm particularly fond of and I want to share with you briefly is called multiphonics. Now, it's often pointed out that certain instruments in the orchestra have the capacity to play multiple notes at the same time. Think mallet percussion instruments, think piano or keyboards, think string instruments with double stops, triple stops, quadruple stops, that sort of thing. And then there are instruments which are often said to only be able to play one note at a time, particularly woodwind and brass wind instruments. Well, with the brass family, we technically have a way of essentially doing our own version of double stops and sometimes triple stops, and it's multiphonics. What's entailed is this. Essentially, we play one note, and that's the vibratory pattern established by the lips, but then separately, with the vocal cords, we sing a second note, usually above, sometimes below. And then, if these two notes are within an octave of each other, and if they are in tune, a third resultant tone can manifest. So it's possible for brass players to play 2 and sometimes even 3 notes at once. Thank you for taking a little time out of your day to learn how brass instruments do what we do. Next time, I'll be going through the tuba family and talking about the many instruments that are a part of it. I hope to see you in a concert hall again very soon.